Hey everybody, welcome back to Jägerhorn. Today's episode is a little bit shorter than usual, but it's something that I really wanted to show off that I normally don't really show in my videos, and even still in this case, a lot of it has been off-screen, but I really want to delve into planning more. In general, Jägerhorn is a project which I planned a lot more than I usually do, but still I think it's a topic that's very interesting to talk about and actually show as well. Hence why I'm also delving into a lot more cinematics for these shots to really show what the planning of this ride looks like. Because the way that I went about doing it mostly was between this episode and the episode that I recorded before this, I spent some hours actually using the terrain textures to plot down where I wanted to build certain things and where I wanted the coaster layout to go. And in that way, kind of get an idea of how the coaster can run. And personally, I think this is possibly the best way to plan your ride. I think this is also something that's very personal, it's very subjective, like if you even want to plan your rides at all or what kind of playstyle works best for you, but I find that for most people, especially for people who don't want to take papers and sketch their ideas or in general have difficulty putting their ideas into real concepts but come up with ideas all the time, I think putting them down in terrain textures is something that's quite easy and you can always do it and very easily adjust it. It's already in there in-game and it's something that you can also really easily use as a guideline yourself to get the rest of your ride and all of the scenery in and get it all placed in a sense that it's all exactly placed like you were imagining it to be, because that's where I think it's the extremely crucial part in the creative process, from getting that vague, abstract concept in your head being turned into a real, concrete ride or park in Planet Coaster. So yeah, I kind of did base this on a few sketches that I made on paper. I actually did some concept art for this ride, which is not actually that usual of a thing for me to do, but it's something that I figured worked kind of for this ride, since it's very much focused on sightlines and on the general appearance, while not even being that extravagant of a ride in general. But still, I really wanted to experiment with getting every single detail nailed down on the map, so that's what I wanted to show off here. Now without further ado, let's get into the time-lapse and actually show you how you can pick up that very basic idea with terrain textures and actually turn it into reality and build your paths and coasters over it. So what I had to do in much of this episode is work on the tracks for the coaster itself, and this is also where I was very happy to actually get this planning in. It kind of just works very well for a time-lapse, coincidentally, since I don't want my time-lapses to consist of me erasing my mistakes and going trial and error on everything that I do, which is something that happens quite a lot. But I usually have to try to remove it from time-lapses, but in this case you already kind of have a guideline in all of the terrain textures, so you already know where to go. Of course, I did still have to kind of remember where I want the coaster tracks to go higher and where I wanted to go down and up and do different kinds of elements and interactions, but generally I think a terrain texture layout like this is a very good guideline to follow, and something that also makes the rest of the process a lot easier once you've got everything painted down. And it's also just really easy because you don't really have to draw anything. I mean, like I said, I did make some sketches, but you probably don't want to see them. They're pretty bad, and they were very quickly made just because I had like a flash of inspiration of what it would look like, and I had to translate my sort of brain mental image into something on paper very quickly. Since I kind of think very visually in that sense, but I'm really bad at actually putting it into paper, and Planet Coaster's too slow of a medium for that, so that kind of worked very quickly. But in a similar sense, you know, having a layout like this also prevents you from forgetting what you were going for in the first place. Now, something really awesome happened in the time that I started recording this episode. Unfortunately, most of this episode was still recorded when that didn't happen yet, but recently Planet Coaster got an update, and one of my favorite things in that update was the removal of terrain collision detection. Now, you were already able to put coaster tracks into terrain and sculpt the terrain around that, which is what I'm doing in this episode basically. But now you're also able to build a coaster track first and then sculpt the terrain out, around that, and actually have the terrain go through the coaster track. Which is something that I wasn't able to do at the beginning, or hell, through 2/3 of this video, so unfortunately you're gonna have to see me struggle with getting the train actually into the track, or a little bit underneath the track if you will. But that's gonna change. Maybe just a little bit too late, but it's still a really awesome addition nonetheless. Now you'll notice that a lot of the coaster stays very close to the ground, which is quite typical for a mine train of course, but in this case it's really close to the ground. There really isn't much of a mountain for this coaster, except for the mountain, which is really the major weenie, and one of the reasons why I did that was because I really wanted to keep in mind the photo points, if you will. There are quite a few shots where I was planning to have the coaster station in the foreground, or basically have the coaster track and the little hills around here in the foreground, then having the station a little bit after that, and far in the background having the weenie of the church tower, etc. So basically everything over here is very low to make sure that the sight lines from the coaster itself really stay intact and that you can see the mountain far away, and that it seems a bit bigger than it really is. But something that also kind of helps with keeping everything very low here is that I really was inspired by Big Grizzly Runaway Mine Train, especially its second half where it's very fast and stays very low to the ground as well. So we've got the second half of this coaster also dropping down from that very steep drop instantly underneath the path and underneath some bridges and into some pretty fast curves, and even some airtime moments. I think there's a little bit of slightly twisty airtime in there. So it's a slightly more exciting part of the ride than the first part. The first part being much more the sort of mountainside, very mellow, quiet train ride that's much more reminiscent of Big Thunder Mountain, I think, in terms of layouts. But the second part is really going to be that more rough, second, faster, more thrilling part of the ride. So yeah, hence why everything is also kind of low, and we've got the coaster sort of hugging those very small hills with its curves and the hills that the coaster has. Also, I wanted to get this small lake in here, since before I was actually planning to have the queue in here, but that was a part of planning which turned out to not really work so well, because the initial idea was we would have the queue in here just because it would fill up quite nicely, but the thing was it kind of created more bridges than I wanted to have, and the bridges kind of blocked the line of sight pretty much everywhere. And I figured a lake would just create a better sort of photo moment for that part there, even though you don't really have a path going there. I think it is a really good view for the coaster itself, especially since the coaster has two curves that go beside that lake, from which on the other side of the lake you'll be able to see the church tower and the station. I mean, this is the sightline I was talking about a little bit ago, so hopefully that kind of adds to the atmosphere of the ride. Oh, and in the middle here, by the way, I haven't really talked about this yet, but we've got the transfer track. I wanted to make this coaster as compact as possible, and you can probably tell it's actually on a very small footprint. It's actually really small, and in terms of the layout on a larger scale, how small it is, I was more inspired by Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, I suppose, in a sense that this ride could be placed even somewhere in the middle of a park, perhaps, or somewhere along the edge of the park on a very small footprint where there really isn't too much space left. So it's all very tight, and I also tried to make the borders completely straight and allow for some backstage areas besides the coaster as well. So along with that thought, I also wanted to incorporate the transfer tracks in a way that made the coaster more compact, but also didn't feel like I had to waste any space to build things that you don't want to see. So instead I kind of opted to have the transfer track in full view. Of course I'm gonna hide the actual technical part of the transfer track, but I actually wanted to use that part to add an extra building and have the coaster go around the transfer track like that, which should hopefully make the scenery a bit nicer. It adds one more building to add to the scenery, and it means it's both functional, but it's also an important part of the scenery. And at the same time, it should make the coaster a little bit more compact. So yeah, that's kind of the plan behind having the transfer track and the entire storage building for the coaster be in the middle of the view like that. And with that, the layout of the coaster is also really mostly finished. At the end of it, it really dips into a lower section after diving alongside the lake over there, and after that it still has one final curve and curving over the lift hill, which I thought was some interesting interaction also with the section after the second drop as well. So we've got that going on, and then after that it really loses all of its speed, and I'm pretty glad with that. I don't think there was any potential energy wasted there, so that's pretty good. So the thing that I wanted to move in afterwards was the queue, and I sort of wanted to fit that into the footprint which we have so far. I'm still not entirely sure, but I'm most likely going to just make this the park border and get a building over the queue, get some scenery around it in such a sense that it's not obvious that you're on the side of the park, but it still fits in with the footprint of the rest of the ride. So that's what we're going for here, although of course I also wanted to have a bit of interaction with the ride itself. So we have that bridge going next to the bridge that is the final part of the coaster. And we also have another bridge going over another section of the coaster. I'm slightly worried that the queue is a little bit too short, because quite honestly it really is. So I might see if there's a way to extend it next to the station building, but to be honest, there's not too much that I can do about it, I guess. I wish there was a way to make more tight kettle pens, because that would be something to really help the capacity of the queue. But until then, I'm gonna keep it mostly this way, because it works better in terms of the way that it looks. I didn't want to draw the queue into any areas where I didn't want to have it, so my space was pretty limited there. And in a way I kind of backed myself up into a corner, but we'll see. At least I'm somewhat glad with what we have, but if there's any way to improve it, I'm definitely open for all kinds of ideas, and I'll be sure to still mess around with it. So the rest of the path system is also something that I wanted to plan, since there are also quite a few photo spots, especially for the path, that I wanted to keep in mind, and also some buildings, as you'll notice, and this is actually something that's pretty crucial to the planning using textures. As you'll notice, I'll have a color code for certain things, so the coaster track had that one brownish color. We had the light, not entirely sure what it is, the light hay color, I think it was, for the paths. And then we also have another brown earthy color for the buildings, so you'll see some buildings along the side sort of blocking off the backstage area and the other side of the mountain. And we also have a big grey or brown spot for a restaurant which we're gonna have, and that is also definitely going to be a bit of a photo spot right there as well. It's gonna be a restaurant which probably has one of my favorite angles of the ride, and it also has a path coming out on the other side which very tightly hugs the coaster as well, which gives you another unique view of the coaster. It's actually a path that doesn't go anywhere, but it will have a viewpoint, so I think it's pretty justified in being there nonetheless. And yeah, that's basically my basic planning of paths and coasters. A last little tidbit that I got into here was just making a quick wooden fence as the border of this area right here. Not actually too sure if I'm gonna keep that, but I still kind of do like the fence. And it's simple little fences like this that don't really take you out of the theme, but at the same time they're simple and realistic enough to be in an actual theme park that I really just like to build. Also, the very small variations I think are pretty crucial. Like, with many of these things, be it buildings or fences or anything, wooden structures that you're building, I think going back and just slightly moving stuff, it only takes a few minutes, but it makes it look so much more realistic and slightly varied. Anyway, that's basically it for this episode, so I want to thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode, in which I'll get back to some proper theming. Bye guys!